Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have former Atlanta mayor and gubernatorial candidate Keisha Lance Bottoms with us today. We'll chat with her in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Keisha Lance Bottoms has served as senior advisor to former President Joe Biden, leading the transformation of the White House Office of Public Engagement and acting as a liaison and media surrogate. Before joining the White House, she worked with CNN as a political commentator based in Atlanta, Georgia, where she served in all three branches of government, as a judge, council member, and mayor. And she's here today to talk about her candidacy for governor of Georgia and her recently released memoir, The Rough Side of the Mountain. Keisha, welcome into the back room.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real honor to have you here. I'm a longtime admirer of your work and your career and you personally. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. The last few weeks have been great for you. You recently won the Democratic primary for governor and had the successful release of your memoir, The Rough Side of the Mountain. So congrats on both.
Thank you very much. I did not plan this timing this way, but it all seems to be divine and lining up as it should.
Yeah, great things come in threes, right?
Right.
So let's talk about the book. You write about pretty turbulent upbringing in a complicated but close-knit, loving family. Take us back a little bit to that period in time.
Yeah, so I was really glad, Andy, that I didn't write this book while I was in office or even thinking about running for office, because it was written, I think, in the purest form and not the lens of a political memoir. I initially envisioned this book as a nod to my family and the women who raised me. So my mom always has these great one-liners. So I wanted to do a series of essays based on things my mama told me. And as I began discussing it with our team, I was really encouraged to just go deeper. And that is what you have with this memoir. I started off writing about my father being arrested.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a singer named Major Lance, just an extraordinary human being who suffered with drug addiction. And my dad was a big R&B singer and gave this little guy, Elton John, his professional start in music. And I write about just how much that changed our family and how we went from what I described as a very privileged life to watching my mom work 2 and 3 jobs, going to school at night, and all these things that were in many ways the absolute worst things that I felt at that time to happen to me had made me into who I am. So I write about this wonderful, very flawed, Southern tight-knit family, the lessons that I learned from them in all of their uneducated wisdom, and just leaning into faith, leaning into just that sense of knowing what you know, and spending so many years running from that, because we like for people to think we just show up a certain way and not realizing that my people really are my superpower. And all of these experiences have given me the compassion and the courage to lead in difficult times.
Well, you were 8 years old when your father was arrested that day that you write about, that you open the book with. How pivotal was it as you moved into your teens, and how did it help shape the adult you became and the success that you became?
So growing up in the 70s and 80s, we had the privilege of hiding from things. Everything was not on social media and advertised and easily found. So it's very easy to put the mask on and act as if it never happened. And I grew up in a house where it was what goes on in this house stays in this house. So we didn't even talk about it amongst ourselves. And quite honestly, a lot of the conversations I've only recently had with my family, and I don't think I've even still had a conversation with my sister about that day. My brother recently described it to me as his memory of that day was coming home, thinking that a tornado had gone through our neighborhood, and the only house that it had hit was ours. Because physically, it was just such a disruptive way in which our house was rated. But emotionally, it was one of the most significant turning points in my life. And I still get very emotional when I think about that day. And
Mhm.
I liken it to a death. And I've since experienced the death of many people close to me, but the grief that I felt that day in the aftermath of that was as close to a death as I felt aside from losing someone, because it was the death of our family. So this privileged life of ballet lessons and this intact family replaced with going to visit my dad in prisons across the state of Georgia. And my parents were never together again. It was the death of our family. And there's so many offshoots of this story that I didn't really feel um, was my story to tell, but just the aftermath and how it individually affected us and still does in many ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an awful lot for an 8-year-old to have to reconcile. You eventually went to college and law school. You became an attorney, a magistrate judge, a city council member, the mayor of Atlanta,
Yeah.
uh, Biden administration senior advisor, and now candidate for governor. Was there a catalyst moment for you, or was it more of a gradual process that set you on that path to the eventual success?
Very gradual. When I went to law school, my dad would say I was going to go and find all the money that the record companies had stolen from him. Oh, but in so many ways, I saw my dad and so many other people who would come before me that I represented and come before me in court. I saw the humanity. So for some people, they may just look like somebody who just made bad decisions and didn't care about life, didn't care about family. But I saw people like my dad in the men and women who stood before me in court. And often the opportunity to offer them the grace that I didn't feel my dad had been offered. And that community service part, I didn't know it was called community service. It was just what my grandmother did. When Miss Brown needed us to drop off food after church, we dropped food off. When my cousin little bro needed his insulin, we went and made sure that he took it. And at some point I came to know, that was, it had a name, community service. So that has always been a part of me. But even going to law school was really just born out of not knowing what else to do
Hmm.
and extending the education journey. But again, it worked out for my good, as my grandmother used to remind me it always would. I met my husband there, got a law degree that proved to be pretty helpful. And just really learning to listen to that voice that only speaks to you, that thing that tells you go, that thing that tells you stay, that thing that doesn't make sense to anybody else, but you know what you know, I think in so many ways has led me to where I am now.
You write about what you call the dark and difficult spaces inside ourselves. In a sense, things we bury. You've chosen to bury lots of things on your professional journey. Why did you feel that was necessary in order to succeed?
Not feeling like I was enough, that if people knew me in my entirety, they'd judge me and wouldn't think that I was worthy. We now call it imposter syndrome. I often think about the poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, "We wear the mask that grins and lies, that hides our cheeks and shades our eyes," where we show up with this mask and we want people to believe, oh no, I've always been pristine and this is how I came out of the womb and it's who I am, thinking that gives you permission to enter certain rooms. But the mask gets very heavy
Mm.
and it becomes exhausting trying to wear that mask, and just the sheer exhaustion of not being authentic. And a very powerful moment for me was when I became mayor of Atlanta and my mother had been trying to reach me, and I talked to my mother multiple times a day. And when she finally got me on the telephone saying, "Well, maybe if I had somebody important call you and give you this message, you would listen."
Mm.
And realizing that not only was I'm wearing this mask for myself, but the people I love are feeling it too. And going through the ups and downs of leadership when I served as mayor of Atlanta, realizing so much of my superpower did come from these very unpolished, uneducated people who raised me and all the things they put inside of me. And that was nothing to ever be ashamed of or run from. That was something I should lean into because everybody didn't have the benefit of that kind of love and power within their lives.
Yeah, well, it's important. It just depends on how you look at those experiences. You can look at them pejoratively, or you can look at them as foundational, in building the character and person you are. The title of the book has its roots in the Black church. It's a gospel song of basically the same name. Tell us about that song and why it had so much meaning to you still that you chose it for the title.
So when I was growing up, my grandmother had a little radio in her kitchen, and that the kitchen was often the center of activity in my grandparents' house. You would hear this song on the radio, or you would hear it from the den coming through. At that time, it was Superstation Channel 17. I think the world now knows it as TBS, and you would hear clips of these gospel songs on this compilation album, The Rough Side of the Mountain. And so I always knew this song. I always associated it with being at my grandparents' house. And when we were looking for a title for the book, it was the first thing that came to mind. And I started thinking about, I looked at the backstory of that song. And Aretha Franklin said it best: the smooth side doesn't give you anything to hold on to. It's the rough side that gives you something to hold on to. So these rough patches in your life that you think are the absolute worst things that could happen are the things that you hold on to as you keep climbing. And then this gospel song, the climb is climbing to get to heaven, but knowing that you're going to have these difficult challenges along the way.
The title also suggests resilience through hardship. What were the roughest moments of your public life, and what did those moments teach you about leadership under pressure?
The roughest moments played out for so many of us in different ways in 2020, when we were all experiencing the pandemic and then the social unrest, and then having Donald Trump in the White House and the instability that his leadership brought to cities across the country. When you are in politics, it's a full contact sport. So you sign up to run for office, and then it becomes open season. And navigating that as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, I signed up for it, not necessarily the rest of my family, but it's part of what this politics thing is all about, unfortunately. But also giving the lessons to my kids, saying, yeah, you've seen it publicly, many of the challenges that we've gone through, but I'm still standing. And hopefully you see the lesson in that too, that it doesn't mean, and then the Bible says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. So I always think of it doesn't mean that the weapons won't come, they just won't succeed. And hopefully that's the lesson I've given to my kids, especially.
The book is deeply personal. It's also, somewhat political at the same time. What did writing it force you to confront about yourself that you may not have fully processed when you were serving as mayor?
I was so thankful that I was talking to my therapist regularly as I wrote this book, because there were so many things that I hadn't thought about in many years, and quite frankly, hadn't unpacked and fully explored. And as I was writing, some of these chapters were standalone chapters. I would write about my mom's hair salon. I wrote about my dad's incarceration. I wrote about my journey to motherhood and infertility, and weaving it all together. And it just, when you're writing, it opens up like every sensory that you have. You remember the sounds, the smells, all the things. I remember the smell of the prisons. I remember the sound of those doors locking and unlocking behind us. I remember the taste of my tears when I would have to say goodbye to my daddy every week. And it was cathartic in many ways, in that I got a chance to share this very deeply personal part of my journey, but also open up an opportunity, not just for my family to see it through my eyes, but for other people who may be experiencing hardships. Even in writing about being inappropriately touched by a neighbor, having those very difficult conversations with my family, just something that I packed away. And what was interesting, when I did the audio recording for the book, I realized I'd never cried about that.
Wow.
And when I was recording the book, I sobbed. And it was a bit embarrassing, and it took me by surprise, but I had never in that way spoken the words aloud. So it was cleansing for me in many ways, but also very emotional.
Sure. It's hard to imagine writing a book and not going through that, you know?
Yeah. And, I figured I would cry writing about my dad, because I still cry about my daddy quite a bit. But there were just other things that that I hadn't fully processed. It still impacted me so deeply.
Let's go back to that 8-year-old Keisha. Your father, as he was being led away by police that terrifying day, he turned to you and he said, "Everything will be okay." You end the book with, quote, "Because it is, and as long as I stay true to myself, it always will be." As you reflect back on your life so far and ponder the great, the good, the bad, the ugly, if you had to point to one thing that has made it all okay, what would that be?
My faith. It's the faith that my grandmother taught me. And if you grow up in a family that's a faith-filled family, at some point, it's all around you, but at some point you have to get to know it for yourself. And for me, it was, the constant reminder from my grandmother. Her favorite scripture came from the book of Romans: "All things work for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to their purpose." And she would just always say, "It's going to work for your good. It's going to work for your good." And not knowing what that meant. And one of the other things she would say to me constantly is, just keep living, keep living. And in having the grace of life, I now see many of these things did work for my good. I wouldn't be the leader that I am. I wouldn't have been the judge that I was. I wouldn't have in so many of these spaces had I not had those experiences. Because it creates compassion. And when my grandfather used to drive a truck downtown Atlanta. He started off with a horse and buggy. He would go into the back doors of businesses and hotels and get cardboard and paper out and recycle and sold it for recycling. And there's not a moment that I don't stand up on a stage in a hotel in downtown Atlanta that I don't think about my grandfather and how many times he went through those back doors so that I could stand on a stage. And it's such a gift in that regard, because it gives you a lens and just a way of seeing the humanity in people that everybody doesn't have the benefit of having.
I always say that life is like a circular chain, and all your experiences are the links, and you can't take out a link, because if you break that chain, it's not the same chain, and it's not the same life. Let's switch to the campaign. You recently won your primary with a majority of the vote, 56%. You clinched the nomination without the need for a runoff, which is great these days. You ran against 6 other candidates. What did that decisive victory say to you about your candidacy and what Georgians want and need from their governor?
We put in the work. And when I began this campaign, I didn't know where the resources would come from. I didn't know how we would get it done. But I knew that I was doing what I was supposed to do. But I never took anything for granted. And again, going back to these experiences, at 8 years old, I learned that you don't get the luxury of taking anything for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So I never assumed that people would vote for me. I always assumed I had to work for it. I never assumed that just because I've been the mayor of Atlanta, that it would make a difference to people. And so we put in the work. We moved around the state. We talked to people, but more importantly, I got to listen to people and got to see what they want in their communities. We spent a lot of time outside of the metropolitan area. We won 158 out of 159 counties. And what it said to me, even Democrats as a whole, although we were outspent by roughly $100 million that Republicans put in of their personal money, we still outvoted Republicans by nearly 150,000 votes. So there were two things. People are determined, they are deliberate, and people believed in our vision for this state.
Georgia has not had a Democrat governor since Roy Barnes was elected in 1998. That's a pretty long drought. Why do you think you can flip the office now?
Listening to the people and offering solutions for their issues. People are deeply concerned about the cost of living in this state. I have a record to run on where I can say this is what we did in tough times. This is how we provided affordable housing. This is what I see as the pathway for better jobs in this state. But talking, listening, and then having a plan of action. And then again, not taking any voter for granted, going into communities and saying how I will make a difference or work to make a difference in the lives of those communities resonates with people. I've had so many people across this state say, nobody ever comes to see us. Nobody's ever been to my town. And, you got to go where the people are. So, part of it is, the voting rolls and voter registration and having people on the rolls and people showing up. There's the data part of it, but then there is the personal touch as well. And we're merging both.
The midterms in November, you'll be facing either the Trump-endorsed Burt Jones or Rick Jackson. They have to face each other in a June 16th runoff. Take a moment and talk about the two of them.
One and the same. One is already received the endorsement of Donald Trump. Burt Jones is an election denier. Trump is on the airwaves from the Oval Office endorsing Burt Jones. The other has spent over $85 million trying to get the endorsement of Donald Trump. And that's billionaire Rick Jackson, who in many ways he's as far right as you go. He's been running commercials saying you'll be deported or departed. So he is projecting a very right-wing rhetoric that's just not in keeping with what the people in this state are looking for right now. They're not talking about the affordability crisis in the state. They're not talking about jobs. They're not talking about improving healthcare. They're not talking about improving literacy rates. It's all about an extreme agenda that's not top of mind for people.
In many ways, Georgia has become ground zero in Trump and the GOP's election denying and election stealing mission. It's been turning bluer and bluer each year, and there's been a handful of Republican officials who, in their own way, have shown courage in standing up to Trump's autocratic overreach. This includes outgoing Governor Brian Kemp, former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who switched parties and ran against you in the primary. Most of us know Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who Trump tried to bully into finding 11,780 votes during the infamous phone call, and also Raffensperger aide Gabe Sterling. I guess the moral of this story is the guardrails held in 2020. How do you feel about those guardrails today in Georgia as we head towards the midterms?
You don't get to be number one for doing business in the country without being a more moderate-led state. I'm deeply concerned at the power hold that Trump has on this MAGA wing of the party. So unfortunately, in this election cycle, we're not getting moderates are not emerging out of the Republican wing of the party. We're getting very extreme people who are in lockstep with Donald Trump and the chaos that he's pushing out of the White House, which is why we are encouraging people to vote for Democrats up and down the ballot. Mm-hmm. We are offering reasonable solutions, reasonable candidates in this state. And we're really close to flipping the House in this state, too. So even the day after this runoff election, the state legislature is going back into session to take a look at our maps. We had stayed out of that fray, and now we're in the middle of that. So it's even more reason for us to elect sane candidates like me and others who will be on the ballot, just because I don't see them coming out of the Republican Party right now.
Yeah, well, one of the issues is that after the 24 election, the party took a look at what Raffensperger did and took away a lot of his control over the election process. And that power shifted to the Republican-controlled legislature and a reconstituted elections board. How concerned are you about that?
I'm deeply concerned. This elections board has been a disaster. It's been like a wing out of the Trump White House, not making sane decisions. We need independent, duly elected constitutional officers in the state who are empowered to make decisions accordingly. And what we've seen from this state legislature, this Republican-led state legislature, is often the weaponizing of their power. They've done it against corporations in this state when they don't like positions that they've taken. For example, Delta Airlines spoke out against some of the voting rights restrictions, and they threatened to take away their gas tax credit. It's not good for the state as a whole, and it's not the way politics should be played. You know, we're supposed to make decisions based on what's best for the people, not based on how we can willpower and penalize people.
Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people often talk about Trump as a threat to democracy, and that comes up in some elections. As we know, voters are really saying, as you said before, they're focused on the economy and affordability, gas prices, groceries, housing, healthcare. James Carville famously said, it's the economy, stupid. This election coming up almost seems too easy for Democrats and candidates like yourself to win if we just focus almost entirely on the economy and the struggles that Americans are having at their kitchen tables every day. Should there be some kind of balance about this democracy thing? Can we walk and chew gum at the same time? Or should it just be like, let's just walk and focus like a laser on the economy?
Well, like I said, Andy, it's important when you go into communities, you're talking and you're going in with this whole list of things you've polled and tested and messaged and all the strategic things you do as a candidate. But then you got to go in and listen. So when I'm going into communities, affordability was already top of mind. People were talking about the cost of housing around the state. People were concerned that we hadn't expanded Medicaid because we've had 9 rural hospitals to already close. Then you add on top of that the big ugly bill. So small business owners started feeling that pinch, where healthcare costs were doubling and tripling in some cases. Nearly 500,000 people have chosen not to even have healthcare coverage since the beginning of the year because of the cost. Then you add on top of that the war. So now people are talking about gas costs, they're talking about healthcare costs, they're talking about housing costs, and they're still talking about grocery costs. So you got to continue to listen. But even on top of that, veterans are asking about access to healthcare. Students are asking about access to mental health care. Caregivers are asking about support. So that's the beauty of going into communities, talking directly to people. There are things that may never show up in your polling deck, but when you hear it enough on the ground, you know that it's top of mind. And we have tried to listen as much as we're talking, so that I can come up with concrete plans to address these issues that I know are top of mind within communities.
There was new polling that came out this morning. It shows a nearly 60-point swing in Trump's approval on the economy and inflation among rural voters. Republicans often frame Democratic governance as culturally disconnected from suburban and rural voters, but this seems like this is huge, is it not?
No, it is huge. And what struck me with every community that we go into, the issues really are the same. The starting point for solutions may be different, but everybody wants the same things. They're saying my housing's too much. They're saying I can't get a good job. My kids' schools aren't doing great. I have to drive an hour for healthcare. So they're different starting points. So it doesn't surprise me at all because I'm hearing it in urban cities. I'm hearing it in rural communities that people are feeling so disconnected from support from government and from leaders. And part of it, just going back to democracy, that is one of the challenges, making people understand or helping them to understand the importance of still engaging and still taking that next opportunity to try and get it right.
During the George Floyd protests in Atlanta, your emotional appeal to demonstrators became a defining national moment. Looking back now, what do you think that period revealed about America's racial divide and about the impossible expectations placed on Black leaders such as yourself?
I think it revealed that we've been putting Band-Aids on gaping wounds, that we are not some post-racial society, and for us to even believe that we are really is to ignore who we are. We are this melting pot of people who look differently, who have different cultural backgrounds, and that's not it doesn't mean we should separate ourselves. It means that we should celebrate ourselves and all the diversity that we bring to the table. I can tell you as a leader during that time, it seemed like there was no point of satisfaction. On the right, it was criticism, criticism, criticism. On the left, it was criticism, 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 which goes back to just that leaning into those things that you know to be true. You make decisions based on what you believe is the best decision, because especially at a time like 2020, nobody is going to be satisfied. So what is it that allows you to sleep at night? And for me, it was even the night that I gave that speech. I didn't have a written speech. It was from the heart. It was my appeal as a mother and as a leader and somebody who cared deeply about the people of my city. And sometimes that's all that we have to rely on. You're not going to find it in a book. There's not going to be a blueprint. But I believe that's what leadership is made of. Those difficult moments that you dig into all that you are and all you have to offer, and you bring it to the table on behalf of the people you represent.
Black women have always been a huge part of the Democratic coalition. A lot of people believe that Black women often save the Democratic Party in critical elections. But do you think the party takes those voters for granted?
I don't think it's fair that we put the future of the party on any one group. It's not fair to Black women. It's not fair to the party. We all have a role to play. Mm-hmm. And I write about this in the book. My therapist teaching me the difference between being strong and being powerful. She said, strong women push through and they have heart attacks and strokes and high blood pressure and they die. Powerful women stop, they feel, they learn the lessons, and then and only then do they move on. And it's my hope for all of us that we're searching for where is our power. I don't believe as a Black woman, our power is just in showing up and voting and doing our part. I think our power is found in how do we engage? How do we make sure we're holding people accountable? How do we make sure there is a return on our vote? How do we make sure that our communities are better for it and not carrying that burden that I and only I can do it, and if I don't do it, the world is going to go to hell in a handbasket?
Mm.
What's the power in our presence? And, I think obviously collectively we're all stronger together.
Why do you think that? I mean, certainly the statistics point to a reality that Black women have always shown up. But why do you think so many other parts of the coalition traditionally haven't shown up? I mean, it's just kind of a general apathy, and it's hard to explain, especially when times are so dire. We all heard about, Rovember. Wow, what that election was going to be after women lost the right to an abortion, to the control over their own bodies. And we saw the turnout numbers. And it's like, what do we need for people to show up? What do we have to have happen for people to show up beyond 55 to 60%? I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about that. That's how few people vote.
I can only, again, I'm speaking from my vantage point as a Black woman. I've never felt that I had the luxury of not showing up.
Right.
That when I physically show up, you know who I am. I don't get to hide my party affiliation, or not I don't get to hide my race. Some people can show up and they can be certain things in certain rooms. I'm going to always be a Black woman in the room, so I don't always have the luxury of taking anything for granted or missing the opportunity to sit something out or so I can't speak to other groups. I just know every time that I show up personally, when I cast my vote for Democrats in this state, it's because I believe they have the best interests of me and my family at heart, my community at heart. And I just haven't seen that offered in especially in this season in many of the far right MAGA folk that we're seeing offering themselves for office. Not when you're running commercials saying you'll be deported or departed. Not when you are Burt Jones and you try and steal the Atlanta airport from the city of Atlanta. I just hadn't seen it. I haven't seen that as an option for me.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that when you look at a combination of things like Trump's abysmal approval, when you look at the elections and special elections that the Democrats have won these past 18 months or so, almost every single one, and even the few that we've lost, the margins have been shrunk considerably, which Republicans are terrified at. When you look at the pushback we're starting to see from the Republican Congress, it's not fantastic, but it's a start. And I think a lot of that has to do with the primary season. The more they don't fear being primaried, the more they may find their, what. And so this is what gives me optimism. It makes me feel like there's a broad base of the coalition that is fired up, that is ready to vote. And do you see that? Do you feel that when you're out talking to people?
I do, because when I see that we were outspent by nearly $100 million and Democrats still outvoted Republicans in the state by 150,000 votes, and it wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it wasn't the nasty fights that we've seen on the Republican side. It says to me that people are determined to make their voices heard and that people still recognize the power in their votes. And our democracy has always benefited from having diverse voices at the table, but what we're seeing from this MAGA wing is something different. What I see and feel is hatred and division. And clearly, the people across the state of Georgia and even across the country are feeling that as well. And I just for the sake of all of us, we just want all of our leaders to be more courageous. This man in the White House is a tyrant. He is doing things to this country that I've never seen done before in my lifetime, that I never expected to see done. And he's, as the kids say, he's playing in all our faces. And that shouldn't just concern me as a Democrat or as a Black woman. That should be something that's a concern to everybody in this country who loves this country.
Yeah. I mean, these are really dark times, and it is hopefully going to be the motivation for people to really show up. And I think we're seeing that. But you know, for you personally, like after everything you've experienced, the pressures of being mayor, the national scrutiny, the political attacks, and now this campaign, what keeps you optimistic about America right now? And I'll quote your dad, who said, everything's going to be okay. Are we going to be okay?
We are. We're not the first generation that's faced difficult times. It doesn't mean it won't be difficult, but generations before us have endured a whole lot worse, and we'll make it through. But we can't give up on ourselves. And this may be an imperfect country, it may be an imperfect democracy, but it is still the best that we have, and I believe it's worth fighting for.
Yeah, I always tell people that this is our 250th anniversary as a nation, as a democracy. And we've been through revolution, we've been through civil war, we've been through slavery, world wars, we've been through Vietnam, we've been through Watergate, we've been through 9/11. We've been through so much as a nation. And we are so strong and so resilient and so dedicated to that democracy that we have come through all of that. And it's like a really bad former reality TV show host isn't going to kill that. He's just not going to, he's not going to kill that or us. We're going to get through him too.
That's right. And he doesn't deserve the honor of destroying this democracy.
Right.
And, which is why we want people on all sides to stand up and be heard and push back. This is one man who is trying to dismantle America. And for all of us to sit by and do nothing, it would be disgraceful. So for some people like me, it's stepping up, running for office. Mm-hmm. Other people, it may just be all you have in you is to register to vote and show up to vote. But whatever that thing is that you can do, we've all got to do our part if we're going to get through this.
Well, if you look at his numbers, he's lost the independent vote. He's lost Hispanics. He's lost young people. He's even starting to lose his bread and butter, which is non-college white voters. So I think he and his party are going to be in for a huge surprise this November. And I believe you will win your race as well. And that's when this country starts to turn. So thank you for coming on and chatting with us about not only the campaign, but your book, which again is called The Rough Side of the Mountain. Good luck with the campaign, and do come back and chat with us again.
Thank you. It's been great to join you. Thank you.
Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhiniecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengyel. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.